Next speaker on the list here is Mr. Gordon Young. So Gordon is Principal of Ethilogical Consulting. Gordon is, as a professional ethicist, he offers extensive understanding of decision-making methodologies, value articulation, challenge management and strategic planning for necessary success in today's hyper-connected, complex world. Gordon is a lecturer in professional ethics in the RMIT University School of Architecture and Design, and he has worked extensively with volunteer organisations in rural communities, particularly in the Centre for Participation award-winning Right on Track project in 2016. He has also provided consulting services to the St James Ethics Centre, Australian Scout Association, Rotary Australia Centre for Sustainability Leadership, Laneway Learnings and Australian Volunteers for International Development. Can everyone put hands together to welcome Gordon to the stage?
I write my own PR. Right, thank you very much for having me. My name is Gordon Young, work in professional ethics. And can I just say, I previously worked in environmental consulting for quite a long time, and in the 16 years since I started this, there we go. It is phenomenal to see people in this room, in this place at this time. 16 years ago, it was hard to imagine we'd be in this space now. So I thank you all for being involved in this. This is your standard model of a sustainable business, right? Now, we have the environment there, social and economic, all nicely interlinked, right? Now, this is a pretty good model. I'm sure we all agree. However, I think it's always useful to step back and have a bit of a look at what exactly it is we mean when we say sustainability. What is the exact definition of that word? And quite frankly, it's a little bit more grim than we'd like it to believe. Sustainability isn't really a high ideal. Sustainability is survival. Sustainability is the ability merely to continue doing what you're doing without it failing. And this is, I do ethics. Ethics aren't very useful if they're not challenging, so here's your first one. This is an excellent model to aspire to. It's not an accurate reflection of reality. This is an accurate reflection of reality. One of these is more important than the other. You cannot have society that if you do not have the environment will do quite well without society. And the economy, of course, is a construct of society. So, sustainable business is not best practice. In fact, on a long enough timescale, it is the minimum standard we must aspire to. So, this is good news for everyone in this room because clearly this means that sustainable business is the clear ethical imperative. It's what we absolutely must be working towards. Here's challenge number 2. Why aren't we doing it? Now, obviously, huge amount of progress has been made. Massive progress. As I said, 16 years ago, I couldn't imagine being in this room. However, the fact remains, sustainable business remains a fringe pursuit. As demonstrated by this wonderful graph, demonstrating energy consumption by source over the last several years. You will notice while renewables continue to grow, not enough. So, obviously there's a number of practical reasons surrounding this, cost being the obvious one, technology, awareness, infrastructure, government support, invested interests, we're all aware of these, and most of your business models are dedicated to trying to address these, and excellent, very glad that you are. However, there is one common thing that is often sort of glossed over or not directly addressed, and that, quite frankly, is motivation. Now, motivation can sound like a soft sort of topic, can't it? It's sort of like, well, you know, we'll present a business case and that'll address their needs. Bear in mind that it's pretty, or you could take it the other direction and say, yeah, we can motivate them all they want, we can do all the education and the incentive, but if we can't build a business case, they're not going to do it. Please bear in mind that it is quite limitless what a human being can throw themselves into doing with sufficient motivation. At various points in our history, and I hate to go straight to the war example, people had quite literally charged machine guns, despite having seen what happened to the previous group of people that did that. Motivating staff through incentives, or managers and clients towards environmental sustainability is not merely a matter of education or incentives. I'm sure we've all seen both of those fail in different contexts, especially when they shouldn't have. Yeah? We always thought that getting education out there, making the issue of climate change in particular visible would be enough. Unfortunately, it wasn't. In many cases, it backfired. Incentives, again, they can be quite effective, but sometimes they just don't work, against all odds as well. It's a question of ethics. If you want to motivate a person, it's about the question of ethics, and quite frankly, if I had to summarise the entire field of ethics, it comes down to one pretty simple thing. It's a decision-making framework. Specifically, you need to know how they make decisions, what are they putting effort into, what are they focusing on. Unfortunately, quite often the parties themselves couldn't tell you. And I can pose that question to you right now. What exact framework do you use to make decisions? Now, I actually do an articulation process with most of my clients and some of my students, and to be honest with you, even after that, and it's quite intensive, we still only get a conscious list of values, which we then immediately run through some hypothetical situations and they immediately fall apart. So, that's fun. All right, what's the purpose of your organisation? Challenge number 3. I'd like you to write that down if you can. Keep it concise, don't go mission statement on me. But if you can, I'd like you to write down what is the purpose of your organisation. Now, frankly, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO or you're at the very bottom of the tree, because your organisation has a purpose. Now, it's not profit. That's usually the go-to answer, but quite frankly, making a profit is a function. It's absolutely crucial. If your business wants to function, if your business wants to survive and do anything that needs to be profitable or at least sustainable financially, however, that's just a function. It's like saying walking or breathing is the function, is the purpose of a human being, right? Yes, necessary, very necessary, everything else is contingent upon it, but it's not really where you're going, is it? Now, maybe it's stakeholder satisfaction. Might be as pure as that. Could wonder why you're not doing something a lot more profitable and a lot less ethical. As soon as you start mining into this question, we start to get some interesting answers. Anyone find that question challenging? I'll take that resounding silence for a yes. It's a big question, and it's a complicated question, but it's also incredibly fundamental. The purpose of your business, as you understand it, determines how it's run, what it does, why it does it, in what order, and what's prioritized. It has massive implications for your business as a function. More important question is this, however. Does everyone in your organisation agree with you? More to the point, how would you know? Here's a standard organisational structure for a medium-sized company. Right. Now, wherever you fall on that, the question is, do all these people share your vision? Do any of them disagree with that vision? And how would you know if they did? And quite frankly, that's some pretty important information, right? Let me illustrate this with an example. In Victoria, there is a local government. That is not them. They will not be named for reasons that will become apparent very, very soon. Within this local government, there is a team, the sustainability team as it happens, and it's structured pretty much exactly like this. 1 manager, 2 team leaders, and 3 teams underneath it. You've got one person is each of the leaders, and about 12 people on the bottom level. There was a bit of a problem in this team. At the lower levels, not at the upper levels, there was a 40 to 60% turnover rate per annum. It was pretty high. 0% turnover rate in the management, strangely enough. A survey was conducted, a cultural survey based on this high turnover rate and some concerns surrounding it. Obviously it didn't come from the managers themselves, it came from the directors above, and they found that the team members had low confidence in their managers and in the team's output as a whole. Management responded to this as such. First, they got everyone into the room and demanded an explanation. How do you think that went down? Secondly, they gave them a sheet of paper with the goals of the organisation as they understood it and demanded everyone sign it. And finally, they instituted a system where everyone would have to self-report at every subsequent meetings about how they had, in the last week, contributed towards those goals on that piece of paper they had signed. Now, I don't know about your thoughts on this, but for me, this sort of management approach is the meetings would continue until morale improves. What do you think the result of this was? You see the intent, yeah? What do you think the result was? Well, I'll tell you. Another survey was conducted, and this time it showed extremely low confidence, going so far as being 0 across multiple criteria. The survey was also conducted with the management, and guess what they felt? High frustration and feelings of betrayal at the disloyalty of the team members below them. Turnover went up to 80 to 90%. What's going on? Now, from an external point of view, this is a total disaster. But consider what is being conveyed here. The message downwards that is being received by the staff on the lower level is basically that your criticism will be punished. Yeah? How dare you betrayers like that. How dare you come up with any sort of criticism? And so what is the imperative then for the staff? What is being rewarded? Also, consider the message going upwards in these circumstances. We do not support you. And the worst thing about all this, no one thinks they did anything wrong. Right? Management was going along sitting pretty, thinking everything was going perfectly fine. Yeah, with high staff turnover, I think the rationale given at the time was that we're preparing people and moving them up. All of the people that leave our department go into better positions. Yeah, well, that certainly was not the case, but nonetheless, it's a nice rationale. Then this survey came along and ruined everything. Yeah? Exposed management to some pretty harsh criticism that they weren't prepared for. Their responses, while pretty draconian, were intended to do what? Intended to find out what the problem was and then inspire people towards those team goals. Of course, if your team didn't already have buy-in to those goals, why on earth would they take this as anything other than a threat? And so we have now a very, very toxic culture. Motivation is not only unrewarded, but it was being actively punished. Consider this in both directions. If management wanted to introduce a new concept or a new idea or lead a new charge, what's the message they're getting up from their team? We don't support you. If a team member wanted to institute something new, or something positive, or something creative, what's the message they're getting from down? Criticism will be punished. New ideas and the wrong culture will be seen as criticism. We seek to promote sustainability throughout organisations and to our clients for that matter, or within their organisations. Safe communication is crucial to promoting and maintaining that motivation. Because at the end of the day, people see you as a threat, or see you as an unpleasantness, or see you as some sort of impediment. They'll stick their heels in. People can be remarkably creative when it comes to this. I suppose the criticism is critical for improvement. Absolutely critical. It's not fun. It's extremely unpleasant to experience, and if anyone's familiar with the concept of cognitive bias, nearly every single one of those revolves around avoiding criticism. Protecting your sense of self is something we delve into quite a lot with our clients in the training. However, if the criticism is being made, then the criticism already existed. The question is whether or not you know that. Accountability is key to this. Now, accountability, I mean something specific. Once again, organisational chart, standard sort of process. What mechanisms exist within your organisation that ensure that staff can voice concerns, confident that those concerns will be considered on their merit and that they will not face reprisals for those criticisms? Have a think about that. A lot of people tell me they have an open door policy. Yeah, that's great. I can see the intent very clearly on that. But if the staff already don't trust you, that's an added threat. It's just not just saying, I don't trust you, it's saying, I'm going to be watching you as you go past my door. Right? What mechanisms do you have in place that allow for not just those concerns to be voiced, but to be voiced safely? The power dynamics within organisations are significant and almost never accounted for. So, some take-away questions for you if you want to consider this, taking it back into your organisations. Are effective and accurate monitoring mechanisms in place in your organisation? What do they measure? Another problem within that local government was the fact that their monitoring mechanisms tended to measure success based on the amount of education they did, based on how many people they reached, as opposed to if those people changed their behaviour for any sustained period of time. What is the response to failure? Is it punitive? Is it constructive? Is it inquisitorial? I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way, but rather asking questions as to why it happened rather than responding immediately to the result. What is your staff's confidence in those mechanisms? What is the staff of your client's confidence in those mechanisms? If they have a problem, can they voice it? And do they have any proof of that reliability? Proof is in the pudding. You can say it all you want. A lot of the work we end up doing works around working up to companies that have some excellent policies in place. Top-notch code of ethics, whistleblower reporting, everything. You reckon they get used? Anyone familiar with CommInsure's little dalliance into insurance, well, not fraud exactly, but redefining what qualified as a medical condition so they didn't have to pay our claims? That organisation had a stellar whistleblower policy. Didn't work. And the whistleblower that eventually did come forward to report it to the media, strangely enough, no longer works in the industry. Purpose of this presentation isn't to make you feel like a tyrant, because I'm sure that you're absolutely not. The fact that you're even in this room demonstrates some pretty good things about you in general. Nor that your staff don't support you. Once again, I'm sure that they do, but that's probably because of your nature more than anything else. Purpose is to identify the limitations of your knowledge. Because regardless of how high, and unfortunately, generally speaking, the higher up the tree that you sit, the more you're insulated from that criticism, which is a risk. How many times have we seen someone who, by all accounts, is at the top of the tree, leading a very significant organisation, steer that thing directly into an iceberg, and everyone's standing around going, how on earth did you make that mistake? Yeah? Anyone ever worked in an organisation where the staff know exactly what the problems are? They're standing around in the boiler room of the ship saying, yep, we're going towards an iceberg. This is not going to be good. Anyone that can get off the ship gets off the ship real quick. Anyone that can't just hunkers down and hopes for the best. The captain happily steers towards the iceberg. Right? Lack of confidence, lack of communication. The means may justify the ends. The ends that we're working towards here are non-negotiable, quite frankly. And in that sense, whatever gets us there, gets us there. However, as with anything else, the means we use to achieve these ends will dictate very strongly the results that we get. Now, once again, I am absolutely certain you're all working towards great ends, and I'm also fairly confident you're all using very constructive means in doing so. However, be aware of this. Just because you think you're doing the right thing doesn't mean that your target audience also agrees, and you need to know that. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Anyone, any questions for Gordon? Thank you for that. Very insightful. You've stunned everyone.
That's a good sign or not.
We were talking outside about what I was calling business as usual, leave your morals at the door, which is a kind of reflection on my career when I walked in as a grad into a professional consulting industry, and didn't know anything about industry, didn't know anything about business, and you just do what you're told. And then later on, a few years down the line, you kind of realise that maybe businesses shouldn't be making some of these decisions, and we've completely been indoctrinated into a business. What's your thoughts around that process and how we can potentially try and avoid that, or become companies that can make moves away from that sort of behaviour?
I'll try not to go into a completely separate lecture. It's a fairly common problem, very standard problem. We call it the is-ought conundrum in ethics. Basically, the idea that this is how things are versus this is how things ought to be, right? Also known as principle versus practical reality. Too often we see those things presented as a dichotomy, one or the other. The old hand comes along and says, this is how we do things, welcome to the real world, kid. The new graduate comes in and says, this is how we should be doing things, and I don't care why you're not doing it already, right? That doesn't work. You present that as a dichotomy, nothing gets anywhere. The idealist bangs their head against the wall until they get jaded enough to be a pragmatist, and the pragmatist just doesn't move. We need to see this as a transition, as a period, particularly the key factor that's usually neglected with that is over time. Every single step forward is a step forward. It needs to happen over time, because anyone that, if your principles in particular don't take into account the practical realities that we currently face, they're not particularly good principles. You're not going anywhere, right? Cost, technology, willpower, psychology, these are all very real. Whether they should be or not is a different question, but they are very real. You need to take those into account in your process going forward, which to a large degree is exactly what all of you are doing with your business concepts. Yeah? Finding those opportunities, finding niches, finding ways of communicating with others. So, I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Yep, Steve Morris, Circular Food. I thought that was really good, Gordon, thank you. Two things. Is the International Day of Women or something today? I'm just wondering, at senior management and director level, have you seen any correlation between more women involved at those levels and shall we say, a better culture within an organisation?
Yes and no. So yes, insofar as this is, to be perfectly honest, I'm a staunch feminist, and insofar as I say that, I don't believe women are any less susceptible to corruption than men are, quite frankly. You concentrate power in any one person's hands and it has the same effect on everyone. And you're able to insulate yourself from criticism, which is a pretty good recipe for going right off the tracks. That said, yes, I have seen improved performance when it comes to women in leadership roles. which I mainly attribute to the fact that they're under a lot more scrutiny than men generally are. New to the role, more to prove, higher standards, understand what they've had to put up with in the process of getting to that role, and as a result tend to have a fairly high standard. Long term though, I expect we'll see that even out.
G'day Gordon, Simon Carter here. I couldn't help but think that in your case study you were talking about the White House. There's a lot of parallels there, and it does seem to be driven by a particular ego in the House in that case. Do you have any tips for taking such a person on a journey as somebody who sort of operates from a very different ethical song sheet? It's probably a tough question, but do you have any tips?
I give wonderful money to get 5 minutes of access to Donald Trump. But that in itself is half the problem. Quite frankly, Donald Trump isn't a complex person. He'd be quite an easy nut to crack. The problem is getting access. Right? I mean, again, the centralisation of that power means that he doesn't have to hear from anyone he doesn't want to hear from. And that makes it incredibly difficult to get up close, adapt the message for him, and have that conversation. One thing that I'm consistently telling my students in particular, but also our business officers, there's 2 words we need to eliminate from our vocabularies when it comes to ethics. First one is stupid, and the second one is evil. Neither of those exist. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with people about this afterwards because I realise that's somewhat controversial. Everyone thinks that they're doing the right thing. Even when people think they're bad people, they think that being bad is a good thing, right? It's badly calculated self-interest, and that's Donald Trump in a nutshell. So yeah, no, I'm quite confident you could take him somewhere. It mainly comes down to listening, trying to understand what he's trying to achieve, and then very gently persuading him to recognise that what he's doing is not going there in any way, shape or form, right? But you need access, and that's kind of the trick.
Just one quick comment. It reminds me of a story, a friend of mine who's a corporate level coach, and there was a major business with a tyrant at the top, and she managed to convince him to spend a week on the Murray-Darling paddling down. And that was transformational, turned around the whole organisation. Yeah, got him stuck on the river for a week.
Absolutely, which I'm sure was a total change of paradigm for him. Right?
Hi Gordon. So I'm a manager of a structure that looked remarkably like yours, but in New Zealand, so it wasn't me. But I have wanted to get feedback from my team, and I've done 360 reviews where I get glowing responses about everything wonderful that I do. I know that's not true. Have you got any recommendations about how to get that feedback from people?
Yeah, it's tricky, and it will depend very heavily on the context within the organisation and where the barriers exist in particular. But broadly speaking, champions are not necessarily a bad idea. Like finding that one person who's willing to say something, right? Like, and if they're given a license to, everyone's been in a meeting with that one person who likes to talk. That person is more likely to give you the frank and honest feedback, especially if they're given some sort of entitlement to do so, right? Written anonymous, the more anonymous you can go, the better. Yeah, admittedly, you're still going to get some degree of people being like, I don't want to be. Yeah, one trap to be aware of with some of these cultural surveys in particular, they're anonymous. They just ask for your department and what level you're on, and you know what's your written home language and so on and so forth. It becomes real obvious, real fast that you're very identifiable in those circumstances. Won't put out for everyone, but sometimes it will. I could answer in much more detail, but it will depend very heavily on the circumstances involved.
Any more questions?
In what circumstances would someone engage, I guess, an ethological consultant? Is it after something goes wrong, or?
Depends very strongly. We do a lot of work with local government sort of in a proactive sense. So, for example, I mean, they're a wonderful case study because a councillor gets elected, they have no background, necessarily no experience, no qualifications, it's not required. Oftentimes they have a niche issue they care about, have made enough noise in the community, and suddenly they're on the board of a multi-million-dollar organisation. Right? So, and as a result, in Victoria in particular, there's been multiple local governments being sacked because things get out of control and the state government doesn't have an intermediary measure, and then all of a sudden it's sacking time. Right? So we prefer to go in preventatively, and basically a lot of, like I said before, most people wouldn't be able to tell you their guiding values or their decision-making methods. And so we help you articulate that and therefore increase your exposure to criticism or your enthusiasm for criticism, which solves a lot of these problems. We do come in to fix as well if necessary. We're not a PR firm and we're not a crisis firm, but we can make sure that it won't happen twice.
Right, any other questions from anyone? Gordon, you mentioned purpose earlier. What are your thoughts around, number one, if companies don't know what their purpose is, then actually, delving into that and then bringing their team along with them to actually enrol them in that purpose?
Do them at the same time, frankly. If you've got questions about the purpose of your organisation, involve your staff in that. Is anyone familiar with the concept of participatory design? Yeah, it's an industrial design practice, a philosophy that surrounds that. The idea basically is that while it is significantly more intensive in terms of time and effort and frustration, involving the users of your service or your product in its design at every stage will get you a product or service at the very end that is significantly more successful and less problematic than if you design for a problem or for a possible service and then just throw it at the user. Right? Involve them along, ask them. Right? And in terms of a specific technique that you can use to discover that purpose, we call it the 5 whys. Do it yourself sometimes. Sit down and say, what do we do? Why? And then, once you've got an answer for that, question that further. Why is that important to us? To be perfectly honest, I don't think I've ever started that conversation with someone who got us 3 before they started to freak out a little bit. Dig until you can get all the way down to 5.
We've still got a couple more minutes before the next one. So,
thanks, Gordon. We're actually going through an exercise at the moment looking at the purpose of our organisation, so we're about halfway through, and I think it is going to get scary pretty quickly. You gave us some examples of local government where these issues were happening, and I guess listening to James talk before about Stone and Wood, that I look at you as an organisation and you seem to be very clear on what your purpose is. So I wonder if you've got any examples of organisations that you say, okay, they're the standout in the space, or they've really got it nailed down, and we're seeing success in what they're doing.
Right. Well, it's going to vary in terms of, because everyone's purpose as they define it then comes with its own metrics of success. So to be honest with you, someone like BHP, for example, within their definition of success is very successful. If you're talking in more in terms of sustainability, to be honest with you, it's quite broad. Most of the people in this room will be doing quite well in that regard. Okay, maybe you don't have purpose nailed down, but it's there, right? As with the ethical frameworks, they exist. You all make decisions on a daily basis. You all make challenging decisions, maybe not on a daily basis, but fairly frequently. The framework exists. You might not be able to articulate it, but it's there, right? The value of what we do is help you to articulate that so we can refine it. Same thing with the purpose. Purpose is there. It shapes what you do. The fact that you might not be able to articulate that is challenging, but it's in there somewhere. In terms of a clear standout, there's the usual industry leaders, to be honest with you, but frankly the idea is that if you are able to, the better you are able to articulate that purpose, the better you are at refining your processes to actually meet it. By contrast, someone who's remarkably unsuccessful at that would be Donald Trump, who's going out there who doesn't know what he wants. Well, either that or does know what he wants and is going about it in such a broken way that he's failing on such an epic scale. It's quite, if he wasn't in power, it'd just be sad. So I've realised that's not a very helpful answer, but...
Any last questions before we wrap this up? How would you fix Donald Trump's organisation right now?
I can't answer that for legal reasons. Frankly, it's not, he's a symptom more than anything else. And saying before, the centralisation of power encourages corruption. Well, the US system encourages the two-party system. Yeah, seriously, the Australian political system looks so amazing once you've seen what's overseas. Preferential voting, compulsory voting, between those two things in particular, our system performs so much better than anyone else's. It prevents people from being ignored. It takes away, like over in the US, they actually have a vested interest in denying people the vote, right? Because those are people you don't have to care about. And with the first past the post system, it inevitably ends up in a two-party race, which means why would you even bother voting for a minor party? It's a pointless exercise, whereas in Australia, we do it so much better. Seriously, I've never been such an advocate for compulsory voting my entire life as we've been trying to do.
But we still have a two-party issue.
We do, but you can see that in practice, the minor parties chasing at their tails in both directions is keeping those major parties on their toes. I mean, the Greens are eating away, especially Victoria, eating away at Labor in their core seats. The far right wing is eating away at the Liberals in their various areas. They've got competitors to the Nationals now. It's messy. But to be perfectly honest, that's the system functioning well. I love a hung parliament. Keep those buggers on their toes.
And that's why Germany's got so far.
Well, in many regards, yeah. What this demonstrates from a business perspective is exactly that. The system in place will get you the result. Tyrants and idiots and so on and fools of hell don't just emerge, right? They're a product of the system. They're a product of what the system rewards. Your governance structures are crucial to that. What you incentivise within your organisation is what you will get.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Gordon. Everyone put their hands down.